This is a slightly different video than what I'm used to. I usually don't talk to the camera. I usually like do the behind the scenes stuff and just edit my videos that way, but this is going to be different for me because I really wanted to get on here and share my story, my testimony, and today, as I'm recording this, it's my Sabbath, so was spending all day kind of writing down my thoughts, and we've had a mouse in this house, and that was a big distraction for probably like 2 hours, and I was like, oh, I'm not gonna get time to record. And I was like, no, I wanted to do it, and I really felt called to be able to share it, so I was like, I'm not gonna let this mouse get in the way of me doing it, because we know that the devil works hard to go against the things of God. So you know, a lot of Christians, when they share their stories, it's like, oh wow, it's so amazing, and their life was completely transformed, and yeah, well, meeting Jesus and following him is pretty transformational. So I hope my story can resonate with someone. Yeah, I think I'll just get straight into it and enjoy, I suppose. Kind of going back before I really knew Jesus, or kind of have that faith and relationship with God that I do now. Thinking about like growing up, I grew up in a very loving home, always like super close with my family, really close. That was what I always knew. Nuclear family, me, my younger brother, mum and dad, and we were always really close with like my cousins, everything like that. So I grew up in a really loving family, still do, very lucky. And I grew up going to Catholic-based schools, like primary schools, high school. Like every Friday we would go to mass. I learnt songs about Jesus. We would sing the Lord's Prayer. I learnt the Lord's Prayer, and just kind of like the basics, all of those kind of parables and stories in the Bible, a lot of the, you know, ones in the Old Testament, as well as like the New Testament, Jesus' life, his death and resurrection. Like it was a bit, all the basics, but I just kind of knew them as stories, and the Bible was this book with all these stories, and that was kind of it. And then in high school, I went to an all-girls Catholic school as well. It wasn't as intense probably as it was in primary school, but sang a lot of hymns and songs about Jesus, testify to love, and all that kind of stuff. The drama students always put on a very intense depiction of like the crucifixion and things at Easter. So yeah, it was always just kind of a part of my life. I have thoughts about thinking about very deep and profound things, even from a young age. Like I remember when I was having breakfast one morning when I was quite little, and I just remember thinking about, you know, wow, like, okay, so we die one day, but then like we live forever. Like I was just like, it was just a random thought that I had, and I was like, wow, we live forever and ever. That's a really long time. So I kind of had this idea about eternity and where we go when we die is heaven, but that was kind of it. I guess kind of in 2012, I was in grade 10 at the time. So I was at high school, and I was getting to meet lots of new friends, and I had a really awesome mix of friends from different cultures, from different experiences, both religious and non-religious. And I started kind of hearing more about Jesus rather than probably God and the stories of the Old Testament. Like it was more Jesus focused, and I didn't really know much about him. The difference was that he was spoken about more personally, like this Jesus guy. And I always know Jesus as the Son of God, but didn't really know him personally like that. To preface the kind of the start of my journey, I grew up with my grandma's sister, so technically I think she's my great auntie, but I've always called her Arnie. Arnie Sandra, she's my mum's godmother. She is a godly woman. She is a pastor, and she has a direct link to God. Like we've always said she's got this direct link to the big guy. She has very remarkable spiritual gifts. She can intercede for people. She's kind of used as the vessel for being able to heal and really intercede and take pain for people. It's a very, very special gift. Yeah, that's her gift from God that she has been able to use for my family. I know she's used it for my mum. My mum has a heart condition, and being on medication and things like that, you know, my auntie Sandra interceded for my mum and prayed for, I guess, the deterioration of her heart to stop deteriorating. And you know, my mum has been medication free ever since for that condition. It's a lifelong thing, but it hasn't gotten any worse with the help of that, so that's pretty amazing. I know my mum wanted to kind of explore her faith a bit more, and I know Auntie Sandra encouraged her to go to a church that she had experienced before, and that was Hillsong, so it's probably a very well-known church now. Mum went on her own, and she came back, and she was talking about how moved she was. It was always different because, you know, I grew up in a very Catholic based schools and experiences, church, like it was all very traditional. So she was like, this is just so incredible. She was saying that she was crying, and I was like, oh, it's pretty intense. I was just like, cool. For those of you who don't know, Hillsong is a Pentecostal church, so very, I guess their pace is very different to a Catholic church. Similar premise where you start with worship, go into like prayer, hear the word and all those kinds of things, but the actual engagement with those things of worship and the word is completely different. So I remember my mum coming back, and she encouraged me to join her, and I can't remember if it was the following week or how soon after I went with her, but a very similar experience. I remember going there, and it was this huge, you know, non-traditional building. Like I've only been to like churches, like very traditional churches, and this was like an auditorium. It was like going to almost like a concert. I was like, whoa, I didn't know church could look like this. And the people are so welcoming, and they're just like, yay, welcome to church, you know, come on in. And like there was ushers and stuff, and I was like, wow, this is crazy. And the music was kind of starting up, and I remember walking in, and I was like, I just felt so like overwhelmed with emotion, and I was like, whoa, this is so different. And yeah, I walked in, and they were singing worship songs. Obviously I'd never heard of them before, so I was just like following along with the words on the screen. And I just remember also feeling like I wanted to cry, and not because I felt sad. I wasn't happy either. Like it wasn't like it was just this overwhelming sense of like, whoa, like I'm meant to be here. And like feeling, I guess now looking back on that, was like the presence of God and hundreds and hundreds of people there to worship him. And it was just like, yeah, it was really, really moving. I haven't experienced anything like that before. I did end up crying, I think, a bit, and I was just like, whoa, this is what you were talking about. And from there, Mum and I went quite frequently, not necessarily weekly, but we went, you know, there were Sunday services, so we went mostly to the Sunday mornings. Sometimes they do Sunday nights, sometimes they do Friday nights, which is a lot more like the youth and stuff. So once I got a bit more comfortable, I kind of went to a couple services like that. But I was always kind of hesitant. I was still really shy. I didn't really know anyone at the church because it's such a huge church. I didn't really get like a youth-based group from there. I just kind of went with Mum and started to learn more about the Bible and listening to the word, how it was preached about. And it actually became like relevant. The word of God felt relevant in today, not just like old stories from thousands of years ago. It was like, okay, this is like real time. This is what God wants us to use now. And so that was pretty different, and it was like, oh, the Bible's like, yeah, not some dated book. It's kind of a guide for now, and we can use that now. So that was really, really cool. Yeah, at school, I kind of, you know, spoke to other friends that I knew shared a similar or same belief, and we would talk openly about Jesus and about church life, because, you know, it kind of was, I could share that experience with other people, and that was really cool. For me, it was really exciting and fulfilling at the time. And so this was in 2012, and at Easter of 2013 I ended up getting baptized at the church. Just felt like a natural progression, and they really encouraged people who, you know, hadn't given their life to God before. I was baptized as a baby, again in the Catholic Church. That was done for me. So this is like, they talk about being born again. So this was something that I learned a little bit about and I was excited to do. So I decided I would do it, and they baptize you in the pools at the back of the church. And being at Easter, it was a super awesome time to do that. And my mum also ended up getting baptized, and so did actually my grandparents, my mum's parents. My grandma and grandpa, they got baptized as well. We all went to church pretty frequently together. Not so much like my entire family, but like we all went, and we'd go at like Easter time and Christmas. They did big Christmas spectaculars and things like that. So yeah, that was kind of life for a few years. Like we called that church our home. Did that for a few years. I ended up, graduating high school, went straight into uni, and ended up getting into what I would say is actually one of my first proper relationships. I dated a friend at the end of high school, but I never felt like it moved past the platonic stage. I always saw him as a good friend, so it was actually not long after that I went back to a boy that I'd known for a few years through high school. We had this ongoing flirtationship. He was a bit of a flirt, and he'd always kind of hooked me in. And when I finally graduated, he was still in his last year of school, but yeah, we'd always kind of had this thing, and we finally got together. So we started dating kind of like the middle of 2015, and I kind of had a lot of my first experiences with him because I hadn't had a proper relationship before. About to turn 18 when we first started dating. I just turned 18, and this was the time after high school that I was losing a lot of my friends from high school. Like, they were doing their own thing, finding themselves, and so we were spending a lot of our time together, obviously. And yeah, like I said, I shared a lot of my first with him. I gave myself to him, and I shared a very sexual relationship with him. He was all of my, those experiences that you share for the first time. So obviously, we formed that bond and were very close. Yeah, I know looking back, I was more attached than he was. We loved each other, but obviously I think it's just different for a girl, and kind of led me in my sexuality, and I ended up exploring things like porn with him, and it was just kind of like all those things that I guess felt safe to do with him, especially in my first relationship. I just thought this was like a normal thing to explore with your boyfriend, and so I never really questioned it. I still believed in God, and I knew that he wasn't necessarily an atheist, but he didn't believe in God. Like, he was kind of open to believing whatever was out there, because he's like, I'd have to try all the different kind of religions to know what was true. I never really spoke to God about him, but I still just kind of put him on the back burner. He was always there. I still believed in him, but I didn't really have a relationship with him. I was still going to church, but my focus very much shifted to be all about my boyfriend. I found I was very much putting him on a pedestal. My world just felt like it revolved around him, and I was finding I was probably defining my worth in him, because he was the most important thing to me at the time. So I was like, however he sees me, that's how important I am. And I know that looking back now, being a first love and doing the things we were doing, it's all consuming, a first love. So I understand that now. And when it's all consuming, it doesn't have any bounds. So that was kind of very overcoming at the time. Roll around to 2016. This will probably take up a fair chunk of my testimony, so strap in. But 2016, I would say, is a year that changed my life, changed my family's life, and I will talk about some sensitive things, so just preface, if you don't feel comfortable hearing what I have to say. I won't go into like really gritty details, but it's just this is my life. It's raw, it's real, and probably a lot of you have gone through something like this. So yeah, and for my family who are probably watching, yeah, we're going to go over some stuff that they already are very well and truly aware of and experienced with me. So yeah, we'll just dive straight into it. First half of the year till like May 2016, I don't really remember much of what was going on. It was pretty seemingly good, like nothing really stood out. May rolled around, it was coming up to my boyfriend and I's like 1 year anniversary. It was towards the end of May, and we were just at home having dinner, and we got a phone call. Still on the landline then at home when we had landlines in the house. And my mum jumped up and answered it, and I don't actually know if she prefaced this in the phone call, but we just knew it was Grandpa. She just threw the phone and just like ran out the door. My grandparents only live literally a 2-minute drive, like it's a 15-minute walk to their house, so they literally live around the corner. I think she ran out the door, yeah, and she just said, "It's Grandpa, he's having a stroke." And she just ran, like she was gone. So we were like, okay. And at the time we actually had my brother's friend around, James. He was having dinner with us. He'd came around to visit. And my dad actually had an accident at work, and he fell on his elbow. And his elbow was shattered, and he was, couldn't lift certain things over a certain weight, and he had to be really careful with it, especially when driving and things like that. So James offered to drive us around, following Mum, but Mum, by the time we got around, everyone was there, all the Ambros, all the family and everything. So in hindsight, God was already, working. In the moment, you don't really see those things, but my mum was studying her aged care at the time, a course in that, and she went on to work in that space for a little while. But the week before this happened, I think they just covered strokes, so she was able to just kind of jump in and help my grandma before the first responders got there. So I remember we were, I think, waiting outside while the Ambos were bringing my grandpa out, and I saw his eyes kind of flicker open when they were in the Ambo. I kind of didn't realize how serious it was until probably after the fact. So it all happened very quickly, and it was all just like, it was a bit of a blur really. But I remember the next day I went to uni, and I met the family. I was already near the city where I was at uni. I think I went in and met the family there, and my grandpa had been moved into the ICU unit, and yeah, I think that's when we were like, oh, this was like pretty serious. I hadn't really realized the enormity of the stroke that my grandpa actually suffered. So his brain actually, in the stroke, the clot that moved to his brain, it actually separated his brain from the stem. So he actually got a very rare condition called locked-in syndrome. So it is how it sounds. It basically shuts down the body. You lose your senses quite progressively, but not all of a sudden. But yeah, it wouldn't have been a life. He wouldn't have survived anyway. That whole experience was a very long and drawn out goodbye, unfortunately. But a lot of the treatment and the things that happened within the hospital were very traumatic, because this condition it's very rare. So a lot of the movements around the staff and things, obviously they were more interested in it because they don't see cases like it very often, but at the end of the day, still a person there and there's family involved. So it was a very traumatic kind of experience with that. So my grandpa I was very close with him, and very sudden and a very traumatic way, obviously, that he did leave us. So that was kind of he was the matriarch of our family, very much the head of the family. And like I said at the start, my family is very, very close, and we would go around there all the time because they literally live around the corner. They'd pop around all the time. And his funeral was the day before my 19th birthday, so that year was just kind of already felt like a bit of a write-off. Like it was just adjusting to all of that when you experience death of a loved one, particularly, let alone just like in general. It can often bring up questions of your faith or life and things like that, asking, why would God allow something like this to happen? And it's not usually till, hindsight's a wonderful thing. You usually see it weeks, months, years later down the track. So we all know everything happens for a reason, but it was, nonetheless a very traumatizing experience. It still has ongoing effects, obviously, to this day. A couple of weeks later, Mum and I had actually already had tickets to go down to a conference in Sydney with Hillsong. They do a Hillsong conference usually once a year, and we'd already bought tickets, so we were super keen, and it was really good just to kind of really immerse ourselves back in that space. Even though we were kind of grieving and going through everything, like it was just some really nice quality time for both of us. And with God, we were just able to worship and go and hear all these different speakers that were all in the same country, international people, everything. And they released a new album. Like it was all just like really exciting, and it was a good, probably like little lift for us at the time. It was super moving, and I think we were down there for like a week, so we got back and we went straight to Sunday dinner like we usually do. Obviously that was still very different, not having grandpa, but yeah, it was probably only a couple of weeks after everything had happened, so that was nice for us to be able to do that. Then the next day, my brother was still in school. He was in grade 11, I think, and he was due to go back first day of term the next day. It was term 3. We were just spending some time together at home, obviously just the family. It was my dad got a phone call from James again, the friend that was with us with everything with grandpa. I cannot remember the specifics of the conversation or how he told us or what happened, but we learnt that one of Liam's friends had passed away. He had taken his life the day before, coming back to school the morning of, and obviously they notified the school, and he was one of Liam's best mates. There was a couple of years between them, but they actually also lived around the corner from us. Cody, I only got to meet him probably once. I think he popped around. We were having a party at home, and he came around, and I finally got to meet this Cody, because Liam was kind of popping over there all the time. And Cody's sister Taylor actually would often pick him up, Liam, on the way to school. They went to the same school, and she'd come around and they'd pick him up and go to school together. So I always knew of him. It was in and out, and I let Codes used to come pick Liam up on the back of his motorbike, and go back around to their place for the mischief. And he was 14 and been going through some stuff, and he that was that. And this is only probably 5 or 6 weeks after we lost grandpa, so it was just kind of like a blow. It was after school holidays. We were just kind of going through everything, and it was like, what? Like, that feeling when you get told that someone has died, that someone that at least, and that's all the feeling I remember. And it was just in the pit of your stomach, and I was just like, oh my gosh, this is real. Like, how has this happened? Like I said, I didn't know Cody that personally, but knew him through Liam, because it was one of his good mates. And my experience then on how it affected me, I guess I wasn't expecting it. You watch your brother go through losing one of his best mates. That was just, as a older sister in your family, you want to protect your younger siblings especially, and we'd just been going through all this grief already. But what I struggled with the most through the loss of Cody actually was being able to very easily put myself in the shoes of Taylor. So Taylor was an older sister to Cody, and they shared a very similar, very same nuclear family that we had: mum, dad, older sister, younger brother. So I just, I guess it's what I learned now is, I suppose, the experience of vicarious trauma. So feeling like if that was me, how would I go on? I just really struggled seeing their family unit be torn apart the way it had been. And Codes was reflected a lot of the same qualities Liam had. They were very, very similar. Very athletically talented, very good looking kid, really happy-go-lucky, bit of cheek, and that really, really affected me more than I expected it to. Devastating as it was, it was just the ongoing experience of feeling like I was going through that loss, seeing them and thinking, oh gosh, what if that was me? I'm really close with Liam, my brother, and they were really, really close. So it just was super easy for me to go, oh my gosh, how would I live if this if that was me, you know. Suicide is a very different kind of death, you know, knowing that he had struggled enough to make that decision. That was really hard to fathom. You know, I'd only ever known of a girl, I think she was in the grade below me. I didn't find out till later that was how she died, by suicide. But I didn't know her. And so I'd never experienced a loss through suicide before. So, you know, he was just a kid and I was just like, what is going on, you know? Yeah, the trauma, or like vicarious trauma of that, through that experience set in a lot deeper than what I ever expected it to. So within the space of, you know, about 6 weeks, 2 very sudden, different but very traumatic deaths had occurred, and it was just like, yeah, a bit of a head spin. So to continue the journey of this year, of that year, we a couple weeks on, the boyfriend at the time, he ended up breaking up with me, and that was, you know, obviously my first real experience of heartbreak, and going through the grieving process of anything at the time, I was grieving people who had died, but going through heartbreak and breaking up with someone is, you know, grieving someone who's still living, and that is just a different kind of grief. So something I really struggled with was, you know, he was with me through everything, you know, losing my grandpa, and he actually came in and said, you know, goodbye, and he promised my grandpa he'd look after me and give me hugs he wasn't able to give. So there was a lot of trauma and a lot of hurt towards him, because if he was breaking up with me, then my grandpa would never know who I ended up, you know, being with. Moving on now, I've moved past all of that and I've forgiven him. I've actually been able to have closure with him, and I know now that he's also happily engaged to be married, and so that's all in the past. But yeah, at the time it was just, I was inconsolable. It was, yeah, one of the worst times of my life. Lots going on, lots of heartbreak. I don't really remember the months that followed that. Like, I guess they say, I think trauma kind of blocks out certain parts of your life, and I'm like, I don't really remember the specifics of that year apart from the traumatic events. But a few months go by, and probably towards the end of November, so really coming towards the end of 2016, Liam and I were at home. We're at home alone together for some reason, but I think Dad was at work or he was out, and he gave us a call, and I could just tell something was up. I was like, something's happened. You know, you just have that tone of voice. I was like, something's not right. And he ended up telling us that one of our family friends had actually been killed in a cycling accident. He was the same age as Dad. And so, yeah, I actually remember laying on the beanbag with Liam, and I was like, we both kind of half laughed because we're like, no, you're not. Like, that Daryl, we're like, no, he's not dead. Like, we were just like, nah, that's really weird. Like, he's not dead. But yeah, he was killed in a very tragic cycling accident, and at that point it just didn't feel, yeah, real. From that phone call, I don't even remember really much of what happened between then and the funeral. I know we went down to Beaudesert. Daryl was someone who we had met through our little athletics. So we went to Beaudesert and District Little Athletics. Me and my brother were part of that for many years. Mum and Dad were always there, and Dad was quite heavily involved in our groups. You know, the parents usually marshal, record all the events that the kids do, and Daryl was always there too. He was a committee member, and he was around a lot of my group because I was in the same group as his daughter Michaela, Mickey, and no one ever used my childhood nickname apart from my family. So I was given the nickname Chicky right from when I was a baby, and the only other people that would ever call me that was Daryl, Mickey and Karen, Daryl's wife, and so I just, like, it was just personal, you know. He was, again, what I struggled with through this. Not only was he a dear friend, but again, Mickey and I were the same age. That could have been my dad. It was easy for me to put myself in a place where I was like, that could have happened to me. This loss is happening all around me. And yeah, it was just, again, like that vicarious trauma along with trauma of that actual sudden death. And that's the kind of experience that year had been with death. It was all very sudden, very unexpected. And I'm so glad that I guess I'd already graduated from Little Athletics, and I guess up to under 17, so we were already out. But you know, going back, it wouldn't have felt right without him. So I'm glad I was able to live out my years there with him, you know, being there on the gun and stuff, ready to go. So yeah, it definitely wouldn't have felt right being able to complete that without him. This section isn't to harp on about death and, you know, keep on talking about all the really traumatic things that happened, but I guess it's really just to paint the picture that, you know, I never really lost anyone that was really close to me like that, let alone 3 people. Not just in 1 year, but it was like 7 months, and they were all, you know, I had been to funerals growing up of people I knew that were known to me, but 3 funerals of people that I knew and all loved very much in the space of 7 months. That's got to take a toll on you. So, and it did. It manifested in a lot of anxiety. It felt like death was coming after me. You know, it was just like all these people, anyone could be next. And it just felt like it was coming after me. And yeah, it manifested in a way of a lot of anxiety. And in hindsight now, what I know is to also be very OCD tendencies. I was suddenly feeling, you know, death is always a very uncertain thing, but I suddenly was becoming very, very scared about dying and about death. And, you know, this feeling that, you know, I was going to be next. And so following 2016, I really started to have my first kind of encounters of what anxiety was. I don't really remember a starting point of my anxiety. It just kind of, I guess, progressed naturally. You know, I had really intrusive thoughts that would tell me certain things that kept me on edge, or, you know, I was really afraid to sometimes go to sleep at night, so I would stay up till, you know, 1, 2, 3 a.m. in the morning, and sometimes I would then fall asleep with like my night standoff, which I know sometimes Dad would come in often and turn it off because he gets up like 4 or 5, depending the time of year. He'll get up really, really early, and he could see that my light was on, so he'd come in and he'd always turn it off. Sorry about the electricity back then. I did that a lot. I don't really remember when the feelings of what I now know to be kind of like OCD tendencies were kicking in. They just kind of started happening again. And at the time, I had a friend who shared very, very similar anxiety and tendencies. So I kind of felt like justified, like it was normal that I was going through this because she was. And yeah, it just kind of manifested from there. That kind of looked like different depending on the situation, but my main things were, you know, a lot of the time when I was driving, I'd be driving and I would look, you know, be approaching a set of lights, and I would say, you know, if these, in my mind, it was the thoughts that I would have as if, you know, if this light turns red right now, like before I get through it, something bad's gonna happen to me or my family. You know, it's a control thing. Anxiety is very much a control thing. So I was trying to, death was out of my control. So I was trying to control things myself, which is not good. And it's not how it works. Yeah, I knew that that wasn't normal, but I couldn't stop those kinds of thoughts from happening. Having thoughts of like, you know, my thoughts telling me I was going to die in my sleep. I also kind of had always the same nighttime routine. So the bathroom that I went to was like halfway down the house, and my bedroom was at the end of the house. So obviously going to bed, you know, brush my teeth, wash my face, whatever, before I go to bed. And I don't know when it started, but I don't know if it started off as like a reassurance thing, but you know, as I'm about to walk out, you know, I'd always catch my reflection and I'd kind of smile at myself, and I'd leave the bathroom. However it started off was it turned into something not healthy very, very quickly, because I felt like I needed to do that. Kind of, not every reflection, but if there was a mirror in my room, or I needed to do that before I got into bed. So If I was in the bathroom, I would smile at myself, leave the bathroom. And I also had a mirror in my bedroom, so I would also smile in that mirror, and then I'd get into bed. And if I got up, I'd have to do it again. Yeah, it was, saying that out loud now is just like crazy. That died many years ago. I don't struggle with that anymore. I can understand how these things sometimes are born out of, I guess, trying to control things when things in our life are not in control. So yeah, it's pretty crazy when I say that out loud, because I haven't really, like, I've told Stephen about it, may have told my family about it in bits and pieces, but yeah, it's something that was really taking over, and I was like, I knew it wasn't normal, and I knew I felt kind of like shame about it eventually, and I was like, that's not right, like I shouldn't be doing that. Yeah, I was giving so much power to these things, and I still believed in God. I know I was still trickling and going into church, but at that time, especially after breaking up with my ex, I was really getting invested into the clubbing scene. I had still had a couple friends from high school, but I was finding new friends through like mutual friends and mutual friends' boyfriends, and so my friendship group was heavily invested within the clubbing scene, going out, drinking. I never dabbled really in drugs ever. I think I tried marijuana once, and that was it. I never got into the drug scene, but I was always kind of drinking. Most weekends going out. I was in my second year of uni, so I had all this freedom of feeling like I was becoming an adult, and so I could just kind of do what I wanted to do. I didn't have a whole lot of money. I was working very casually at this time at the hair salon, and so I was really lucky. I was able to live at home until I moved out. I paid my way where I needed to there, but I wasn't saving a whole lot. And I wasn't doing a whole lot, so a lot of that money was being spent on going out. And I guess this phase of life really felt like my YOLO phase, because after all this anxiety and things that had happened in my life, I was like, you know what, we only get one life, so I'm just going to do what I want. And my anxiety was telling me I was going to die young anyway, so what's the point, even though in my heart I felt like I knew that wasn't the case, but my thoughts were still telling me that. So I was just kind of like, I'm just gonna have a good time and party. So yeah, this was the lifestyle I was living for quite a few years. I still went to church here and there, but yeah, this was just mainly my weekends. And yeah, at the time I'd sworn off boys, because when I finally did get the courage to talk to boys, they were just boys. So a couple ghosters. Yeah, I was probably like 20, 21. This was a good couple of years in, and I just was like, this is not really, I didn't really have a specific drive, but I was just doing my thing. Going out every weekend and all weekend was pretty common. And this one night my friend suggested we go out. It was a Sunday, so we weren't even together, we were at our own homes, but she was like, let's go out. And I was like, okay. Went over there, got ready, caught the bus in, and we had typically like a Sunday sesh. And that night I actually was the night I re-met, like I ran into Stephen. So I'd known him, I hadn't seen him in about 4 years. I met him at a party and we had each other on socials, but I knew exactly who he was when he was walking over to me, and I was like, oh my gosh. So that was the night that we kind of re-met. And from there, we caught up and we saw each other very casually and sporadically for about 3 months, because he actually was leaving the country to study abroad. So yeah, we only caught up like a few times, but I fell for him. It was like knowing I couldn't go there because I knew he was leaving, but I ended up falling for him anyway. Yeah, I remember just feeling different with him, and we didn't talk about God or anything together, but I just felt this pull to him, and I was like, this is just different. Like, we're not even anything yet, but I just like this boy. It was really intense. So he ended up leaving the country. I think it was about October 2018. He was leaving for like 6 years to go study. So I was like, all right. And I remember we still spoke for a bit, like on Snapchat. I was pretty much telling him that I'd fallen for him. Ugh. I remember talking to God and just I was so heartbroken. I missed him already. And I was like, God, you know, if this is meant to be the one, like, why is he going to the other side of the world? I was like, if he's meant to be the one, please make it obvious. But if he's not meant to be with me, also please make it really obvious. You know, so I wouldn't be hung up on him or waiting around, just so I could get on with my life, because yeah, I didn't want to go through that heartbreak again. So quite a few months passed by, and I'm still going out a lot, so a lot of the time I would be sleeping in, especially on a Sunday, because I'd be going out the night before. So a lot of the time, you know, I wasn't going to church with Mum a whole lot. You know, I'd sometimes pick up my Bible and randomly read something, but it didn't really have like context to it. Sometimes I'd just pick up the Bible and be like, you know, God, give me a verse that's going to help me, you know, but there was no real intent behind it. So I would just be randomly opening the Bible and reading random things, and there was no real purpose to it. So its meaning didn't have a whole lot compared to what it is for me now. And looking back, I probably treated God as someone I just turned to when I needed him, out of being desperate, not out of like necessity every day. My faith definitely wasn't true and consistent as what I like to think is much better now. I won't go into it too much, but basically the end of June in 2019 rolls around, and my family and I just got back from an awesome family holiday to Hawaii. And I remember it was the night that we came back, and I was brushing my teeth, and I got a message from Stephen, and he was like, how are you? How was Hawaii? By the way, I'm coming back to Australia. And I remember I just lost it. I was so excited. I ran down to Mum. I was like, oh my gosh, he's coming back. I was like, oh, I asked God for this. I asked God, and I was like, oh, God, if this is it, if this is what you're pointing me towards, I was like, if this is it, okay, but make it obvious. It's pretty obvious. I mean, he's coming back to the country, but I was like, okay, just, you know, he's not coming back for me. And so I was like, okay. And, you know, I had prayed to God after my last breakup. I said, Lord, please don't let me be with anyone who isn't a man of God, who doesn't love you. I want and I need to be with someone who loves you. We met up, I think a week or more later, and the rest is history. We started dating, but in that time we obviously were just getting to actually know each other. And so I grew to learn that Stephen actually grew up in Seventh-day Adventist Church. I never even known what that was before, and what that meant and how different it was, and I just wanted to learn about it. In the couple months before he was enlisted, I think we were seeing each other for 4 months. He was enlisted to start in the army, and so oftentimes actually doing long distance at the time, because he lived with his mum on the Sunshine Coast in Glasshouse Mountains, and I was south of Brisbane. So about a 2-hour drive. It's not super long distance, but it's enough to be like, it's creating a bit of space. So we would spend a lot of time together quite intensely. I don't know how quickly it progressed or how the conversation started about our faith, but we did start talking about it. And his mum, Nat, is, you know, a very, very faith-filled woman, and she spoke about her faith, and I felt comfortable enough to be able to talk about my faith, and that I did know God, that I loved God, but still kind of shamed because I knew I hadn't really got the best relationship with him. But yeah, we would read the Bible together. Stephen had this Bible that his dad had given him when he was younger, and he said, you know, I haven't really opened this, but he knew there would be a time that would come where I would invest time in it, and he felt like that time was now, and we would read it together. And yeah, then he went into the army. It just grew our faith even more, and we had to come to realize that we had to rely on God a lot in our relationship. Yeah, this really started a shift in my faith. We had given ourselves to each other. We both weren't pure. We'd also had obviously both previously been with people in previous relationships, and now also with each other. But we always went through seasons where we were like, okay, what does this actually mean? And bringing ourselves back to God and being like, okay, let's try and, you know, be better at this, but what did that actually mean? So we were trying to contain our faith for it to please God, but not really knowing what that meant ourselves. So it was, I think the intentions were good, but a lot of it sometimes was misplaced. So we really had to rely on him for a lot of what we were going through. It turned out that God very much did answer my prayer about Stephen. He gave me a man of God very much, and he knew that Stephen has such a wealth of knowledge, and I had my own very unique experience with God and with religion, and so he manifested that with us to grow together, and he knew I couldn't do that on my own. So being able to grow with someone in faith together was really what I needed. That is what we've done ever since. We have grown significantly in our faith ever since. 2020, Stephen was posted to Townsville. So I'm from south of Brisbane, he was on the sunny coast, so both still in Queensland, but very much more south of where we are now. He was enlisted and posted to Townsville in 2020, June 2020, and I graduated uni in July, and I followed him up here in September, and straight away started living together, and it was the first time I moved out of home, and so yeah, it was all just bam, 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 new. So we're very much growing in our faith together, and I think we just had to navigate that together and what that would mean. I did join Stephen and start going to the SDA church shortly after we were kind of settled, because he had already kind of sussed out where the church was in Townsville, and there's two here, and so we just started exploring that together. And again, such a different experience to the churches I'd been a part of already in my experience. We have a family here in Townsville, in the SDA church. The people here, they are family. One thing I've learned is that SDA, they are feeders. They'll feed you. We share in fellowship. So many different, amazing, blended different cultures, walks of life. We get to share in food and fellowship. And something that I learned that was really different to anything else I'd experienced was Sabbath, and what Sabbath meant. And I was like, Sabbath? I've heard of that word before, but I was like, that sounds like a really old, like biblical term. I was like, what's Sabbath? Which is really, it's a day of rest. It's a day that God has given us to rest. The expression that we always talk about was, Sabbath was made for man, not man for Sabbath. We were intended to rest just like God did on the seventh day when he created, when he made all of creation. He rested on the seventh day. So if God had to rest, how much more do we need to rest when we're off this world, So getting to learn about what that meant, and how Seventh-day Adventists really honor Sabbath. So we have church on Sabbath, we meet together and have fellowship on Sabbath, and that's on a Saturday. And growing up, that was so different, because for me, Saturday was day of athletics. It would be a day where we, catch up with friends, go out, do stuff. That was like, it was like social Saturday. You'd do everything on your Saturday. And Sunday was kind of typically a day of rest, spend time with family. Sometimes you still do things, but a lot of the time it was family, Sunday dinners, things like that. So that's been a really big shift for me, and it's something that I'm still navigating. But it just means it's a day where you completely rest and you give it all to God. I think it's once you can't go back once you know something. So of course, like without the knowledge all these previous years, I've not really known any different until I know now. And I know how much more weary I feel if I don't have a day of rest and I don't have Sabbath. So I'm really trying to honor that. It's actually, Sabbath has just finished for me. So I've been attending lots of different churches here. There's a church called Calvary here, which I think is also a Pentecostal based church. And I just find myself as, I guess, through all the different experiences I've had in the church, it's really important to have church and fellowship, and people and true friends and family, through Jesus. Jesus creates family. We're all brothers and sisters. So I feel like that is really, really important. But what's most important, what I've learnt now, is that what's most important is relationship with Jesus, relationship with God. We can't get to the Father without the Son. So being able to explore what that means, you know, Stephen and I, we really try to honour our Bible study time now, especially with each other. You know, I've always struggled to read any book, let alone a book which is filled with so much wisdom. It's sometimes overwhelming. So we really help each other with that. Doing, you know, Bible study plans, things that keep me accountable. Watching what I consume content-wise as well is really, really important. And coming to learn, like I said, once you know something, you can't unlearn something. If you go about doing things that in nature are sinful, because we are sinful as humans, it is once you know that that is sin, but if you then continue to choose that lifestyle knowing that it is sin, that's where the enemy kind of comes in, and that's where you have to be really intentional with what you're doing, because it's a reflection of what's in your heart. So now I know these certain things, you know, I try to not use my phone on Sabbath. I try to rest from the world. I know how much that affects me. I know how much it affects Stephen. It really wears you down. So, you know, you have 6 days of the week where you're involved with the world, involved with work, and you're busy doing life. So one day a week doesn't seem so bad to give to God, and he gives back. You know, you invest in him, he invests in you. It's a two-way, it's a relationship. And yeah, I feel really taken back knowing that I get to learn all these things, and it makes me really passionate. I just want to share these things with people. And I guess that's part and parcel why I've made this video. I've been talking for so long. It is dark outside now. So I might have to chop this video down a bit. We'll see how we go. But I hope that this has been insightful. I'd love to be able to dive into more of these kinds of talks and do more series like this of things that I learn as I'm a Christian. I still feel like I'm a baby, even though I was baptized just over 10 years ago. That really means nothing, because in the time that I've, you know, diverted and done my own thing and learnt lots of all these different things and learnt what faith is for me now, I still feel like a baby Christian. I feel like I know nothing. So having an open mind and not being content in where you are in your walk with God always keeps you striving to learn more, and he reveals more. The more you invest in him, the more he invests in you. So yeah, I really hope that this has been enjoyable, insightful, getting to know me a bit more, because I feel like I said, I'm kind of behind the scenes. I work and edit all these videos to share about my day-to-day life, but I'm not really in them or sit down and have personal conversations. And I feel like this is like the most personal conversation I could have about the story of my life. So my Jesus story. So yeah, I will hopefully post something very, you know, a bit more series, a few more series maybe like this of sit down chats, my walk with God, my relationship with Stephen, and a lot more videos probably like this coming up too. Planning a wedding as well, that's its own its own series as well. So I'm really keen to yeah, grow this space, grow with you guys, and I hope this makes you curious about maybe getting to know who Jesus is, questioning maybe some of the things you're not sure about, questioning things that you might be doing in your life that you feel like may not reflect the true intent of your heart, because he lives in all of us. Everyone is chosen. This is not me preaching from a point of view that I'm a Christian, so come and sign up. It's like, no, everyone was chosen. Everyone's a child of God, and everyone's story looks differently. So I hope this inspires you to reflect on your own story, and yeah, I'll be talking to you soon. Bye.